Okay, so we're going to talk today about data collection and analysis tasks. This should be a relatively quick podcast because I want to give you time to actually create something um, for your class. So we're going to start with data collection and analysis. And data collection and analysis tasks are meant to gather real world information in order to make decisions. And one of the great parts about data collection and analysis, if you're actually developing or if you're actually gathering real world information, um, then this means that it makes it more relevant to your students. They're able to understand things, describe things, discuss things that are going on in their world, being able to answer actual questions that matter. So just to follow up, here are the different ones that we've kind of already gone through, except for productivity. I'm not going to go over all of those in order to save time. But what I do want to talk about really briefly is data collection and analysis tasks, and what are these? So data collection and analysis tasks, when they're put together, it's where students are actually gathering real world information in order to make some kind of a decision or to come up with some kind of a solution for the problem. So data collection tasks can be either where students collect their own data, and that can be where they're collecting forms or where they're documenting their own information, like for students that want to keep track of how many fruits and vegetables that they have, as well as grains each day. And then you can kind of analyze where is this particular student based on the recommendations of the US government, or students finding actual existing data sets. So there are things out there that showcase like when flowers are blooming during particular months, so that they can analyze, okay, where are flowers blooming most regularly or earliest, or what does that look like? And Inspire Data, which is a tool that you're going to be using, this is actually one particular set of data that's really fantastic. Data analysis tasks. So data analysis tasks are really about students being able to find patterns and trends. And this is critically important for students because you want them to actually be able to come up with solutions or come up with ideas on their own, as opposed to just digesting what other people have said. And this can be working with words, ideas, and numbers. A lot of people will think that data analysis just means numbers, but actually coming up with what do most people think about, President Obama? What's the common idea that people think about President Obama? What are some common words or things that they associate with the man, especially as he's ending his last year in office? So, and then also to classify, sequence, and relate things to each other. So, how do all of these different ideas relate to one another? Um, so, here's one example of a program that I'm going to ask you to use. It's Wordle. Taxito is another one, and this is actually using Taxito because Taxito allows you to put it in an interesting image. So, this one is the U.S. Constitution, and they copy and pasted all of the words into Taxito, and then based on how commonly used the word was, the bigger it is. So, for example, districts and whereby and Indian, all of these are not used as often as laws, people, states, or right. So you can see which ideas are more common. So when you're looking at this, you would probably say, okay, well, obviously they're really intent on talking about free. They're really intent on talking about states and having states' rights. So these are really big ideas. And nation, even the united part is smaller. So that can start to have you make different ideas about what's important in our Constitution. What are the ideas that they're trying to kind of put forth here? Here are some other other examples of Wordle or Taxito, and these are actually all Wordle examples that I'm going to show you next. And so this is Shakespeare, so you can see through Shakespeare. Maybe you can kind of decide on which one of these Shakespeare's work is this actually. It's obviously one where they talk very heavily about I bite my thumb. So that was an insult, right? And Montague, I think that you can kind of guess which one this is as well. This is an example of Don Quixote, and so you can see what are the common themes in Don Quixote. Okay, so this would be good for maybe for Spanish. This is an example here of Macbeth. In Project Gutenberg, so I'm going to show you, I've already gone to Project Gutenberg here. And on Project Gutenberg, you can look through, they've got a ton of different authors here on Project Gutenberg. So you can browse through different books. And these are all free. These are all copyright-free books that are out in the public domain. So here are examples of Galaxy. You can even go in through book categories so that you can see things on the children's bookshelf. So if you're elementary, you might want to go into the children's bookshelf and to look for different ones in the children's bookshelf. So like the story of young Abraham Lincoln. And I'm going to click on plain text UTF. And now you can see here is all of the text and information on the story of young Abraham Lincoln. So I'm going to press Control A to select all. And I'm going to copy it and come in here into Wordle. And this is another example that I just did really quickly on Pride and Prejudice with Jane Austen. To look at the differences here, you can see that they're talking about Mr., Miss, Mrs., and then it talks about Darcy, Jane, Elizabeth. So it tends to talk a lot about putting formalities and how different people interact, or at least that's the way that I like to see it. So I'm going to come and put the Abraham Lincoln story in here. So now you can see that's been copied and pasted. I'm going to press go. And so here's Abe Lincoln. So obviously those are the things that are big. And what are some of the other things that you see coming up in here in terms of father, young man, president is obviously big. So Nancy. So I would be wondering who Nancy is. Some other things that might come up in here: mother, first, state, Thomas. So figuring out who Thomas is. So based on this, I want you to, I'll ask you to answer class prep, but you will need to actually create one of these and submit these for your class prep. Okay, so that's the first example, and that's an example of a data analysis tool. So now the other thing comes to, but where does this data actually come from? And we previously talked about collecting your own data by using surveys or questionnaires or interviews, cell phone polls, even Poll Everywhere. That's another great place to take it from. Or using sensor-based data, so heart rate monitors. One of the videos that we watched, I think at the beginning of the semester, was where cheerleaders were jumping up and down and they were testing their heart rates to see how their heart rate changed over the semester. So that's one way that you can kind of take it. For those of you that do Fitbit or Apple Watch, you kind of analyze your sleep patterns. All of these things are taking information, or even as simple as, for a lot of elementary schools, they will plant bean sprouts and then measure those bean sprouts as they grow and grow and grow. Or you can find existing data sets. So there are a lot of existing databases online. One of the ways that I like to search is .xls. And searching websites for information and compile it, or looking at existing books, poems, history, newspaper articles. There are a lot of different places that you can get it. And before I go to the next slide, I just want to say the magic word for today is spicy. So if you can remember spicy when you go into your class, just keep that in mind. Another thing in terms of data collection tasks, you can be surveying different people about their heights, or maybe collecting quotes about a particular subject area or how different people feel about different characters. You could take measurements of 3 different plants over the course of a month, or if you're comparing and contrasting if it's better for, to water with a Gatorade as opposed to with regular water, what happens, or even looking at the parties of presidential election winners and recording them each year. Here are a few more examples. Comparing multiple poems in English, looking for repeated rhythmic patterns, so maybe iambic pentameter, that would be something to look for. For physical education and health, actually looking at heart rate monitors or pedometers to see what changes there. Collecting any kind of data from an experiment for science, and then even looking at different people's favorite food, color, sport, whatever that may be. So What I would like you to do next is in Google Forms, I want you to create a Google form, and I'm going to quickly walk you through how to do that. So I just went to forms.google.com, and it comes up here with your untitled form, and I want you to think of something that you might collect data on for your classroom, or you might collect data on in order to get a better idea for something that you would use in your class. So maybe what I will use is for my elementary school classroom, um, how many hours of TV do you watch? Okay, so that's my form there. So in order to do any kind of question here, maybe I'll just title this one TV watching because this is the title of the whole thing. So I'll start with my first question. How many hours of TV do you watch? And I can just click in here. And again, I'm going to say none. I probably want to do per day on average. Right, now I can add an option here. And I can say 1 to 2, or I can just say 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, or more. Okay? And I can make these questions required or not required. I'm going to make that one required. And that's my one question. I'm going to add another question here. And this one I'm going to make as, let's see, I'm going to make it as open-ended short answer. What's your favorite show to watch? So the student would answer quickly in there. And let's say that I also want to do a rating. A scale here. How important is TV to your social life? 1 being not important to 5 being very important. Okay, and so this is all it takes to make my quiz. So when I'm finished, I can press send, and then just go ahead and get the link, and then you can submit this link with your class prep. Okay, and the actual final magic word of the day is beluga. Okay, so if you can remember that and you've watched the entire class prep, remember the word beluga.